My name is Arthur Blake, and this is the story of how my own daughter tried to erase me from my home and my life. She thought I was too old, too weak, and too trusting to see through her plan. But she was wrong, and what happened next will shock you more than anything you've heard this week. Stay with me until the end, because the lesson inside this story may save someone you love from the same betrayal. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe and share in the comments where you're tuning in from. Every word of support gives me the strength to bring you more true-to-life stories like this one. The evening it all began, I was finishing the last spoonful of stew Grace used to make better than anyone. The phone lit up with a familiar name, Marissa, my only daughter. For a moment, her cheerful tone filled the silence of my house and made me forget how empty it had been since Grace passed. "Dad, are you eating enough?" she asked, sounding warm, almost worried. "Remember that grocery app I showed you?" "I'm fine, sweetheart," I told her, hiding the truth. I'd almost burned the coffee pot earlier that day, forgetting the stove was on. She paused long enough for me to imagine her mother's old frown line appearing on her forehead. "Dad, maybe we should arrange someone to check on you more often." I tried to laugh it off. "Paul thinks I'm managing just fine. How's the conference in Fairhaven?" She explained how Paul handled most of the client meetings while she sat through endless talks about business strategies. I wished her luck, told her I loved her, and listened as she said she loved me too. Then I heard the click. She hadn't hung up. At first, there were muffled sounds, maybe her purse shifting, but then came words that froze me to my chair. "He left the burner on again. He's slipping fast." Marissa's voice, sharp and practical, not the tender tone she'd used with me minutes earlier. Paul's voice followed, calm but cold. "It's time, Marissa. He can't live on his own anymore. The house is worth nearly $1 million. If we move him into a facility, we can sell fast and finally buy that place in Silvergate." Marissa laughed. He'll never see it coming. Tonight he was so thankful just to hear my voice. He has no clue we're planning this. The receiver slipped from my hand and struck the hardwood floors I'd laid with Grace 23 years ago. My chest went numb, the sound of betrayal louder than the wall-mounted clock Grace had given me 14 years ago. I sat staring at her photo, the woman who had once told me, "Arthur, don't give her so much, she forgets to be grateful." I'd brushed it off back then. But now, as the crickets stirred in the garden Grace had planted, her warning cut through me like a blade. They believed I was confused, a burden, disposable, but I wasn't gone yet, and I wasn't finished. In the drawer where I kept old bills and papers, my fingers found proof of everything I had sacrificed. Tuition slips from Montana State University, over $46,000 paid with my blood and sweat. I could still see Grace rubbing my shoulders as I came home late from construction shifts, whispering, "Arthur, you're working yourself to the bone." "She deserves better than we had," I had answered. "She can do anything." Grace kissed my head that night and gave me one last warning. Don't let her forget to be grateful. And now I knew. Marissa had forgotten everything. I should have listened to Grace. Every warning she gave me was right. In my folder of records, I found the bill for Marissa's wedding. $31,000 poured into one night she called her dream come true. I'd told her we could only manage a few thousand at most, but her tears broke me. For half a year, I laid hardwood floors on weekends, paid under the table, just to give her the night she wanted. During our dance, she whispered against my shoulder, "Daddy, you're the best father in the world." I believed her, but like so many promises, those words vanished. I remembered co-signing her first car loan when she couldn't qualify. I remembered the calls I made to line up her first financial advising job when she'd been unemployed for nearly a year after her degree. None of it seemed to matter anymore. The folder held newer wounds, too. 2 years back, Paul lost his tax consultancy position under circumstances they never explained. They asked to stay for a little while. I never asked for rent. I covered groceries and utilities for 3 adults when my life had already been reduced to one widower's quiet meals. Paul would clap me on the back, calling me the most generous man in Riverbend, and Marissa would promise, "Dad, we'll pay you back." That payback never came. Instead, I covered Paul's luxury car repair. $2,900 gone in one shot, my emergency fund emptied. I picked up the tab for their $210 birthday dinner at a seafood place downtown because they insisted they deserved it. At their last barbecue, Paul bragged to his friends that I was like a father to him, and I was proud, so foolishly proud, that I didn't see how they were bleeding me dry. That night, I walked upstairs into the bedroom Grace and I once shared. Her jewelry box sat untouched, her glasses folded neatly by the lamp. I pulled the deed from the drawer. Arthur and Grace Blake, purchased 1994. My name stood alone now, no co-signers, no liens, no one but me. The grief in that room was unbearable, but beneath the grief, a harder thing began to grow. They thought they'd outsmarted me, that I was too weak to defend what Grace and I built with our bare hands. They wanted my house, my life's work, decay. But I wasn't finished. On my desk sat a business card I hadn't touched in years. Michael Trent, real estate attorney. Grace had insisted we prepare our papers when her health failed. I realized it was time to see him again. The next morning, I wandered through my home with new eyes. Not as a father, but as a man seeing what his daughter and her husband saw. Market value, square footage, assets waiting to be liquidated. My hand trailed along the granite counters I had installed myself, speckled gray with threads of gold Grace had chosen because they caught the sunlight. I remembered the morning Marissa first toddled from the fridge into Grace's arms right there on that kitchen floor. I remembered the dollhouse I built for Marissa when she was 7. I spent months in the garage, sanding wood, while Grace stitched curtains from scraps. "Daddy, it looks just like our house," she squealed. And it did, right down to the bay window I had worked overtime for months to afford, because Grace dreamed of sitting there with a book. Upstairs, Marissa's old room still glowed yellow, the shade she'd begged for at 16. Her desk still sat beneath the window, the same one I'd crafted for her homework. Every piece of it spoke of sacrifice. But the master bedroom hit hardest. Grace's bookmark still rested at page 219 of the novel she'd never finish. Her clothes still hung in the closet I built to her measurements, faint with her perfume. It was the room where she once whispered her last plea. "Promise me you won't let them use you, Arthur. You're too kind, too generous." I hadn't listened then. But standing in that room, I vowed to listen now. "Promise me you'll protect yourself." Grace's words echoed in my head as I opened another folder in my office. Inside were photos she had saved, me in 1994, younger, stronger, pouring the foundation of the house that would define our lives. Grace had visited the site often, balancing a hard hat over her dark hair, handing out lemonade while her belly grew with Marissa. The papers told the story behind the smiles. Second mortgage, a loan from my brother. Grace taking part-time work at the school office so we could afford materials. Beans and rice on the table, duct-taped cars in the driveway. But we had built something real, a home for our family. And now Marissa, who had taken her first steps across that kitchen floor, wanted to turn our sacrifices into a quick payday. She wanted to move me aside like I was clutter in the corner. I pulled out the worn business card. Michael Trent, Trent Rowe Legal. The edges were frayed from years of handling, but the number was still sharp. They thought I was a confused old man. They were about to learn I wasn't nearly as weak as they imagined. I dialed. My voice was steady when the receptionist answered. The next morning, I wore the dark brown suit Grace had chosen for her own funeral and walked into a modest brick office on Lakehurst Road. Michael Trent greeted me with calm professionalism, his shelves lined with law books and family photos. "Mr. Blake," he said gently, "I remember you and Grace. I'm sorry for your loss." I nodded, accepting the coffee he offered. "I need help. It's about my daughter and son-in-law." He listened carefully as I described the phone call, their plan to sell my home and place me in a facility. His pen scratched across paper, but his face hardly moved. When I finished, he set the pen down. "Mr. Blake, this is unfortunately very common, but let me be clear. Your house is in your name only. That means Marissa and Paul have no legal claim whatsoever. They cannot sell it, cannot move you, cannot touch a dime without your consent. Relief washed over me, then hardened into resolve. So if I wanted to sell it myself, you could, he confirmed. Riverbend's market is booming. Your property in Millstone Heights could fetch top offers in days, especially if you accept cash buyers. If you're serious, I can line everything up in 24 hours. I leaned forward. I built that home with my own hands. I know exactly what I'm doing. We went over the details for nearly an hour. Market values, timelines, networks of eager investors. When he mentioned the $200 consultation fee, I paid it in cash. It felt like the first investment in my freedom. Stepping into the sunlight, I felt the weight on my chest loosen for the first time in years. My phone buzzed. Marissa's name. The screen lit up as the call rang once, twice, 3 times. I didn't answer. I could picture her in Fairhaven, maybe waiting in some hotel lobby, checking her watch, expecting her grateful old father to pick up right away. Let her wait. Let them both plan their new life with money that wasn't theirs. While they schemed, I was already 2 steps ahead. They had no idea what was coming. By the time I left Michael Trent's office, I already had the beginnings of a plan. My phone buzzed nonstop in my pocket as I drove home, Marissa's name flashing again and again, but I let it ring out. Let her wonder why the grateful old father wasn't rushing to answer. When I finally walked through my own front door, my hands didn't tremble anymore. Michael's words echoed in my mind. It's your property, your decision. 23 years of sacrifice had built this house, and I wasn't about to hand it over to a daughter who thought I was already halfway gone. On the 6th ring, I finally picked up. "Dad, there you are." Marissa's voice was sugar-sweet, but I heard the strain underneath. I was starting to worry. "Sorry, sweetheart," I said evenly. "I was running errands. How's Fairhaven treating you?" "Oh, you know, endless conferences," she replied with forced laughter. "But listen, I have exciting news. Paul and I are planning something wonderful for you, a vacation. A place that's like a resort, but with medical staff in case you need it." I nearly cracked a tooth from clenching my jaw. A resort. They couldn't even say nursing home out loud. "That's very thoughtful," I said warmly, masking the fire in my chest. Paul's voice floated in from the background. "We've already taken care of arrangements. You'll be comfortable, Arthur." "When are you thinking?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Next Friday," Marissa said quickly. "Just pack clothes and essentials. We'll handle the rest." Essentials. As if my entire life, Grace's garden, the furniture I had built, the family scrapbooks, meant nothing. "Actually, Marissa," I said softly, "I've been working on a little surprise of my own. You'll see it when you get back." "Oh, Dad, you're too sweet," she giggled, misreading my tone completely. "We'll talk soon. Love you." "I love you too," I replied, and for the first time in weeks, my hands were steady when I hung up. I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and typed, "Real estate agents, Riverbend." The search results spilled across the screen like ammunition. Years of working as a project foreman had made me methodical. I compared names, client reviews, sale times. One name rose above the rest. David Keller, Keller Realty Group. Quick closings, cash offers, testimonials that spoke of houses sold in less than a week. His number sat bold beneath his photo. I stared at it, hearing Grace's voice in my memory. "Arthur, are you sure?" "Yes," I whispered to her picture on the desk. "I'm sure." I dialed. "This is David Keller, Keller Realty Group. How can I help you?" "Mr. Keller," I said calmly, "my name is Arthur Blake. I need to sell my house, and I need it done fast. How soon can that happen?" He didn't hesitate. "If the property is in good shape, I can have cash buyers lined up within days, 10 at the most. Tell me about your home." I looked around my kitchen, this time not as a father, not as a husband, but as a seller. 2 stories, about 3,200 square feet, built in 1994, located in Millstone Heights, 4 bedrooms, 3 baths. Maintained personally, most of the work done by my own hands. David's voice sharpened with interest. That's exactly what investors are looking for. And in that moment, I knew. This wasn't just a sale. This was the opening move in a battle they didn't even realize had started. This is exactly what my investors are searching for, David Keller said after I described the house. Original owner, well-maintained, established neighborhood. It's a premium package. Would you be open to a property assessment? How soon? I asked. I can stop by this afternoon. 3 o'clock. I checked the clock. Just past noon. 3 works. I'll text you the address. When the call ended, the silence pressed against me. In 3 hours, a stranger would walk through the home Grace and I had built with scraped knuckles and sleepless nights. He would put a dollar sign on our memories. I cleaned like a man possessed, wiping down counters, straightening pillows, dusting the bay window. It wasn't for company. It felt like preparing for an execution. At exactly 3, the doorbell rang. My palm lingered on the brass doorknob I'd installed 14 years ago, my hand trembling once before I steadied it. When I opened the door, David Keller looked exactly like his profile picture. Polished but approachable, portfolio in one hand, tablet in the other. Mr. Blake, he said as he stepped inside, his eyes widening. This is remarkable. I watched his gaze move across the crown molding, the solid oak floors I had installed in 2001, and the open floor plan I'd carved by reinforcing a load-bearing wall with my own beam. His admiration was genuine. You weren't exaggerating about upkeep, he said, snapping photos. That's because I built it to last, I answered simply. I was a project foreman. If you do it right the first time, you never have to redo it. He nodded, studying the granite counters Grace had chosen. That veining, beautiful. I swallowed hard. She said it reminded her of morning sunlight. Took me 3 weekends to cut everything exact. He typed notes, tested outlets, and measured the bay window Grace had begged for. My throat tightened as I pictured her there with her tea, glasses perched on her nose. Finally, David pulled up comparables. Properties in Millstone Heights are closing between $850,000 and $920,000. With this condition and custom features, I'd list at $872,000. It'll move fast, top dollar. The number hit me like a hammer. More than Marissa and Paul had smugly guessed. I actually have a group lined up already, David continued. They specialize in high-end rentals, cash only. No banks, no contingencies. I could close in 10 business days. 10 days? My chest tightened. That was 2 days after Marissa and Paul returned from Fairhaven, expecting me to pack essentials for their so-called resort. What's the catch? I asked. No catch. Cash is clean. They'll do their own inspection. But frankly, this house is in better shape than most new builds. I scanned the living room, every corner alive with memories. Marissa's first steps, Grace's Christmas mornings, our quiet Sundays. And yet, I could hear Grace's warning as clear as day. Arthur, don't let them take advantage of you. My decision hardened. Let's do it. David's composure cracked into excitement. Excellent. I'll call them now. I listened as he spoke to the buyers, selling my home like a treasure he'd just uncovered. When he hung up, his grin said it all. They're in. I'll have contracts for you by tomorrow morning. The sun poured through Grace's bay window, turning the room gold. 23 years of sacrifice, about to change hands. But instead of despair, I felt something else stir inside me. Control. David glanced at his watch. How does 9 o'clock a.m. sound for paperwork? For the first time in weeks, I smiled. Perfect. The wall-mounted clock, Grace's anniversary gift, ticked in the silence as if marking the countdown. After David Keller left with promises of contracts and a near-certain sale, I stood in the golden light pouring through Grace's bay window. For the first time since that nightmarish phone call, I didn't feel sorrow. I felt anticipation. The next morning, David returned, contracts in hand, notary beside him, coffee for all of us. I read every clause with the same focus I once gave blueprints. Sale price, $872,000. Cash. Closing in 10 business days. The notary guided me through each signature. Title search, walkthrough, possession window, 30 days if I needed it. Peace of mind, she called it. My peace would come when Marissa and Paul walked into a reality they never expected. I signed. My hand didn't tremble once. The days blurred after that. Inspectors came and went, murmuring their approval at my craftsmanship. One smiled at me and said, "Whoever built this really knew what they were doing." They assumed I was long gone, some relic whose work outlived him. I let them believe it. By the fourth day, I was hunting for my future. I scrolled through senior communities and found one in Silvergate with golf courses and a community center, exactly the sort of place Grace and I once talked about for our golden years. I called storage facilities, deciding what to take: her jewelry box, the family scrapbooks, the essentials of our life. By the seventh day, a calm determination settled into me. For the first time in years, I woke each morning with a mission. Even Mrs. Whitmore from next door noticed the stream of official cars. "What's all the fuss, Arthur?" she asked. I only smiled and muttered, "A little work being done." The truth wasn't ready for the neighborhood yet. On day 8, David called. "Everything's clear. Closing's tomorrow. Funds will wire the same day." That night, I packed a single suitcase. Not because I was leaving yet, but because I wanted to stand ready. Grace's photo sat on the dresser. I touched the frame and whispered, "I hope you'd be proud of this." Friday came bright and sharp, the kind of morning Grace used to say made Riverbend feel like heaven. I dressed in the gray suit she bought for Marissa's university graduation. At the title company office, the buyer's attorney checked every line, and David walked me through the documents like a conductor keeping rhythm. Signature after signature, deed transfer, settlement statement, wire confirmation. Just like that, 1247 Lakehurst Road was no longer mine. $872,000, less closing costs, sat in my account. More money than I'd ever seen. More than Marissa and Paul had dared to imagine when they mocked their helpless burden. "You made the right call, Mr. Blake," David told me as he walked me to my truck. "Sometimes a fresh start is the best gift we can give ourselves." Driving home through streets I'd known for decades, I passed the park where Grace and I once walked, the school where Marissa learned to read. But instead of grief, I felt freedom. Back in my driveway, I sat behind the wheel, staring at the house. My hands closed around the keys, still mine for 30 more days. They felt heavy, like the weight of an ending. Marissa and Paul would be home in 3 days. They expected me packed and pliant, ready for their so-called resort. Instead, they'd find an empty house and a truth they could never undo. I pulled out my phone, staring at the number I'd just written down, a 24-hour locksmith. If I was going to finish this plan, I needed one last change before I handed over the keys. This wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of their lesson. The emergency fee was steep, $200 extra, but after the sale, money no longer mattered. "AAA Emergency Locksmith, Eddie speaking. I need every lock on my house changed today," I said. "Urgent, cash payment. I can be there in 2 hours. Address?" Back at the house, I waited in my truck, watching Mrs. Whitmore water her roses. She waved. I forced a smile and waved back, knowing I was lying to everyone who thought they knew me. Eddie arrived in a dented van, tools rattling in the back. A man in his 50s, he carried the weary confidence of someone who had seen every lockout in Riverbend. "Security issue?" he asked, eyeing the front door. "Change of ownership. Better safe than sorry." He nodded as if he'd heard it 100 times. I stood silently while he unscrewed the brass locks I had installed 14 years ago. Grace had picked them because they matched our knocker. "These are solid," Eddie said. "Whoever installed them knew their work." "That was me," I muttered. "I like things done right." The replacements were silver, sleek, and mechanical. Their sharp clicks sounded nothing like the warm turn of the old brass. "Here you go," Eddie said, pressing a ring of keys into my palm. "Front back garage. 3 copies each. Total comes to $450, emergency fee included. I counted out bills. No receipt, no paper trail, no link back to Arthur Blake. After Eddie drove away, I faced the hardest task, reducing 23 years into one suitcase. Grace's jewelry box went first, followed by our wedding portrait, the novel she never finished. Page 219 still bookmarked. My project foreman certificates, important papers, her cookbook with notes in the margins. Most things stayed behind. The furniture that carried our story, Marissa's childhood scrapbooks, Grace's clothes still perfumed faintly from years ago. Some memories couldn't be moved. I called Willow Creek Residences. "We have a furnished one-bedroom available immediately," said Ms. Alvarez, the manager. "Month to month if you prefer flexibility." "I'll take it." Within an hour, I was signing papers in her office. The unit was small, functional, nothing like Lakehurst Road, but clean. I handed over nearly $2,900 in cash for deposit and rent. 2 weeks earlier, that sum would have terrified me. Now it felt like pocket change. As dusk fell, I loaded my car. Mrs. Whitmore waved again from her window, and I waved back, my chest heavy with the cost of every connection I was cutting. Inside, the house echoed as if mourning. The kitchen where Grace and Marissa had baked cookies, the living room where Christmas mornings once felt endless, the bedroom where Grace breathed her last in my arms. "I'm sorry, honey," I whispered, "but you'd understand. You always said I gave too much away." I locked the new silver locks, dropped the keys into my pocket, and drove off. In my rearview mirror, the house stood in fading sunlight, still solid, still beautiful, but no longer mine. At Willow Creek, the apartment smelled faintly of carpet cleaner. I set Grace's photo on the nightstand, opened my laptop, and made the next call. "Summit Valley Bank, Private Banking Division, this is Thomas Reed." "Mr. Reed, this is Arthur Blake. I'd like to arrange a deposit, around $872,000. The pause on the other end told me he was recalculating his day. "We'd be honored to work with you, Mr. Blake. Would Monday at 9 work?" "Perfect." The weekend stretched before me like unexplored territory. I unpacked Grace's jewelry box, my certificates, the wedding photo, placed them carefully around a room, though Ed had never known her laughter. Saturday morning, I made coffee in the bare kitchenette, the sound of the unfamiliar coffee maker echoing like proof. This was exile. But it was exile I had chosen. At the grocery store checkout, the young clerk smiled as he bagged my items. "New in town?" he asked. "Just moved," I replied. "Starting fresh?" He nodded, not realizing how much truth sat behind those 2 words. That weekend I found a little cafe 3 blocks from my apartment, Cornerstone Coffee. The barista, Leah, had streaks of purple in her hair and a sharp but kind smile. "You're new here," she said, pouring me a cup strong enough to cut through any morning fog. "Retired project foreman," I told her, "looking for a quiet life." "Well, you picked the right corner of Riverbend," she said, sliding the mug across. I sat near the window, watching neighbors walk dogs and push strollers, scenes Grace and I once cherished. But this time, instead of grief, I felt something else: anticipation. Monday came. I wore my best suit and drove to Summit Valley Bank. Thomas Reed, younger than I expected, shook my hand with the warmth of someone used to holding people's futures. "What brings you to Summit Valley, Mr. Blake?" "I sold my house," I said evenly. "I need an institution that values people over fees." "We specialize in exactly that," he assured me. I explained my situation. Widower, fresh start, security. Thomas asked only what was necessary, then arranged the transfer. Nearly $872,000 would be cleared into my new account within days. By Wednesday afternoon, Thomas called. "Funds have cleared, Mr. Blake. Your account is fully active." I hung up, staring at Grace's picture on my nightstand. For the first time since she passed, I felt untouchable. That evening I opened my laptop. I typed mini surveillance cameras. If my daughter and her husband wanted to treat me like a helpless old man, they were about to discover how wrong they were. After careful research, I ordered a small hidden surveillance camera. Expedited shipping, extra fee. A small price for the satisfaction I planned. Then came the note. My first draft was too angry, the second too cold. The third struck balance. Firm, final, undeniable. I wrote in the clean engineer's handwriting Grace had always admired. Dear Marissa and Paul, if you're reading this, my plan worked. I heard your call about shipping me off as a burden. I heard your laughter while calculating what my house might fetch. That house is gone, sold for $872,000 cash. The money now rests safely in my account, where it will stay. I have moved somewhere I am valued, not tolerated. Don't worry about me. Worry about yourselves. Your belongings have been packed and sent to Denver Moving Storage on Lakehurst Road. You have 30 days to collect them. For 42 years I gave you everything. You repaid me by plotting to steal my life's work. I hope the lesson cost you more than the house ever could. With final love, Dad. On Thursday, the FedEx driver delivered the camera. I tested it in my apartment, then drove back to Lakehurst Road for the last time. Inside, the air still carried faint traces of Grace's rose sachets and lemon oil on the wood, but their suitcases by the stairs and mail strewn across my counters told the real story. They had already been treating my home as theirs. I placed the camera into the outlet by the front door, angled perfectly. Through my phone, I saw the entryway, the exact spot where my note would hang. I walked back into frame twice to test the motion detection. The app showed every detail, every sound. By Friday evening, when Marissa and Paul returned, they wouldn't chintant and find their grateful old father. They would find locked doors, a devastating letter, and a silent witness recording every second of their reaction. And for the first time since Grace died, I felt not like a burden, but like a man who had finally taken his life back. I taped the envelope at eye level on the inside of the front door, exactly where they couldn't miss it. Then I touched the mantel one last time, the place where Grace's photo had sat for 22 years. Soon, strangers would put their own pictures there, living out their stories in the rooms Grace and I had filled with ours. It's done, sweetheart, I whispered to her memory. Justice is served. I locked up, tested the live feed from my phone, and drove back to my apartment. The wireless camera was armed, the note waiting, the trap set. Tomorrow, when Marissa and Paul returned, they wouldn't find their obedient father. They would find the reckoning they'd earned. Friday, 5:15 p.m. My phone buzzed with motion detection. On screen, Paul's luxury SUV slid into the driveway. My pulse quickened as Marissa stepped out, smiling like she was walking into her prize. Paul followed, carrying luggage. She tried her old key. Nothing. Jiggle, twist, frustration. Paul circled to the back. Same result. His voice came through the feed, sharp with panic. Marissa, someone changed the locks. Confusion twisted her face. That's impossible. Dad wouldn't even know how. They argued in low, frantic voices until Paul hoisted her through the kitchen window I'd left unlatched. Seconds later, the front door opened, and both of them froze at the white envelope taped squarely in front of them. Marissa ripped it open, her hands trembling. I leaned closer to my phone, watching her eyes dart across the page. Disbelief collapsed into horror. He sold the house, she gasped, her voice breaking. He kept all the money. Paul snatched the note, reading it again as if sheer anger might change the words. $872,000. All gone. Tears streaked her face. That was supposed to be our future. Paul snapped, his facade cracking. Your future? You're the one who pushed him too far. You called him a burden. You wanted him gone. And you didn't? She shot back, her voice shrill. You're the one who said he'd burn the house down. Their fight filled the living room that was no longer theirs. Accusations tumbled, truths spilled. Paul admitting he'd been fired. Marissa realizing she was married to a man with no job and no safety net, and both of them now without a roof over their heads. The irony wasn't lost on me. They had planned to make me homeless in a nursing home. Instead, they were the ones stranded. Through the feed, I watched them sink into my old furniture, broken, furious, and defeated. That was enough. I powered off the camera. In my apartment kitchen, I opened the bottle of 2017 Merlot Grace and I had saved for a special day that never came. I poured a glass and lifted it toward her picture on the nightstand. "To you, my love," I whispered. Justice delivered. The wine burned warm down my throat, tasting not of bitterness, but of freedom. My phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. Marissa, no doubt. I deleted it without opening and turned the phone off completely. Outside, the Riverbend skyline glowed in the gold of a fading sun. Somewhere across the city, Marissa and Paul were unraveling, finally facing the consequences of their greed. And me? For the first time since Grace's death, I felt untethered. I was no one's burden anymore. I was my own man, with my own choices and a future wide open. Arthur Blake had walked out of that house for good, and he was never going back.